Excited to have Curt and a few of the students here talk about their trip to South Africa. If you have cell phones, turn them off. If you have questions, please hold them to the end. If you're interested in going for lunch and discussing this trip further with some of our presenters, that'll be occurring at 7:30 in the dining hall. Curt, take it away.
So thanks for coming and thanks for setting this up, Joe and Eric. I'll do a real brief introduction here. This is research that was funded by the National Science Foundation. Paul Smith has actually benefited from a lot of National Science Foundation's funds to do hands-on research around the world. What you'll see today is an introduction to a project that's ongoing that is actually probably going to be used by climate and environmental scientists around the world. When people talk about global climate change, they really mean global. You need to have a picture of the whole planet. And unfortunately, most of the research that's done on that, about the climate and the environmental effects, have to do with the northern hemisphere and not so much in the southern half of the planet. And when you do that, you get an incomplete picture of environmental change. The other problem that happens is if you want to know what's likely to happen to ecosystems and climates in the future, there are really only two ways to get at that. One is to be very theoretical and do computer models, which have their problems. The other one is to look to the past and see what has happened before. For this topic is paleoecology. And what these fellows have done is gone to the southern hemisphere to a spot that's been studied very little and are filling in answers to questions that have to do with what happens to this part of the world when climates get warmer or cooler. And use that then to project and try to support the models or challenge the models as to what they say the future holds. So without further ado, we have Christiaan and Jay White from Paul Smith College talking about their research in South Africa last May.
Thank you. And you can explain it better. I'm Christiaan.
I'm Jay White.
And this is our work in South Africa.
And thank you all for coming. So, overview of the presentation today. It's going to be in two basic parts. We're going to cover the scientific background, the reasoning for our going to South Africa. In this, we will talk about African climate patterns, weather models and testing of these models, and the science of paleoecology. Second part of our presentation will be about our trip itself, South Africa. We'll talk about our time spent in Cape Town, the field work that we did, high speed, which we will address later on in the presentation, current progress in the research, and threats to the region.
So we're going to start off with some climate patterns. In the tropics, it's generally accepted that warmer global climates mean more rain for the tropics. And this is due to as there's higher temperatures, more water is evaporated as warming arises. And so when it finally does rain, there's more moisture in the air, causing more rain. It's pretty self-explanatory. And this is vice versa. So in cooler temperatures, cooler periods of time, we should see less rainfall. So in the tropics, they have rainy and dry seasons rather than our cold and hot seasons.
Yeah, this pattern of cool global climates resulting in dry tropical climates and warm global climates resulting in wet tropical climates is not entirely consistent. It was found that Lakes Victoria and Naivasha on the equator of Africa experienced dry phases during the medieval warm period. The medieval warm period was a period of strengthened solar irradiance lasting about 1,100 years ago to about 600 years ago. And then they were found to have raised water levels during the Low Ice Age, which immediately followed the medieval warm period about 600 to 200 years ago. These are the results of previous research done by Curt.
Now, Africa is pretty cool in that it has a couple different systems associated with its rainfall. It has the Intertropical Convergence Zone, the ITCZ, and that's responsible for the rainy season all across the tropics, but in Africa, it migrates from the equator south and back north over the season. And it's kind of like a sprinkler head if you think about it. So as the season goes, it goes up and down the South Africa, providing a lot of rain for Africa from the equator down.
So this is just an animation of the ITCZ. The ITCZ is the blue. The darker blue is the spots of heavier rain. And here is southern hemisphere summer, our winter, where the ITCZ migrates south. And then as it goes into their winter, our summer, the ITCZ migrates up to the equator and then back down again for their summer.
The other system of rainfall in Africa is caused by polar winds, and this is due to Antarctic sea ice. And it's just when there's more sea ice, usually in colder temperatures, there's stronger winds, and these strong westerly winds push rainstorms that are normally in the ocean to the southern tip of Africa. So if you think about it, you get cooler temperatures and the sea ice expands. When this expands, there's these winds get pushed farther north. And as they get pushed farther north, rainfall hits the southern tip of Africa.
So these westerly winds really only bring significant rainfall to this very southwestern tip of Africa. And this happens during the southern hemisphere's winter when there's more sea ice and the polar vortex is stronger. And so they call this area the winter rainfall region. And in this animation of their winter, you can see it's right in this area here. And then the ITCZ provides the rain for the rest of South Africa during their summer. And so this area is termed the summer rainfall region. And in this top picture here, you can see with ITCZ migrated south, it's bringing its rain to this area, the summer rainfall region.
So we're going to propose a possible explanation for the inconsistencies that was found at Lake Victoria in Navasha. And this is the compression model. So basically, when it's colder temperatures, like in the Little Ice Age, those polar winds we talked about are stronger and there's more rainfall to the southern tip of Africa. These southern winds also decrease the seasonal range of the ITCZ, so it doesn't allow it to migrate as far north and south as it normally would. So just as seasons go on and it's still a period of cold, the equator gets more rainfall than it normally would, rather than migrating up and down like that sprinkler head throughout the seasons and causing the rest of Africa to be a little bit drier than it normally would as well. And in warmer temperatures, it's just the opposite. There's no polar wind to compress the ITCZ at the equator, allowing it its normal seasonal range.
So if this compression model is correct, it could explain why equatorial lakes Navasha and Victoria became wetter during the cold times of the Little Ice Age. And if it's correct, what we should see is coinciding with these wetter conditions of the Little Ice Age at the equator, we should also see wetter conditions at the winter rainfall region due to these strong westerly winds, and drier summer rainfall region due to the decrease in the ITCZ seasonal range. So, just to show you, so it's the Little Ice Age, and assuming that the compression model is correct, it's very wet here at Navasha and Victoria along the equator. And then this is due to very strong westerlies holding the ITCZ there, compressing it at the equator. So these strong westerlies should be bringing a lot of rain and moisture here to the winter rainfall region. And as it's holding the ITCZ up, these rains are not coming down to the summer rainfall region. So coinciding with all this, we should see dry climates here at the summer rainfall region.
So to test the models and understand the discrepancies that were found at Victoria and Navasha, you need the complete records of past climates, and you can reconstruct that with paleoecology techniques. And as Curt said in the introduction, you need more complete records in the southern hemisphere because the studies just haven't been done there as much as in the northern hemisphere. So South Africa is a really good location to study the history of the weather patterns to see what's going on with tropical weather because it's got those two rainfall regions. The winter rainfall region, which receives the rain from the westerly storms, and the eastern Cape or the summer rainfall region, which gets rain from the ITCZ. So you have a location that has both weather patterns, and you can reconstruct past climates to see what's happening in both those weather patterns at the same time.
So the science of paleoecology. To create and test weather models, scientists most frequently interpret layers found in various natural features. These can be ice, such as the famous ice cores, which are taken at the poles and on top of snowy mountains, places where ice is formed year-round and there's no seasonal melting, so they form layers of ice over time. They can be found in sediments. In our case, we look at lake sediments, stalactites and stalagmites, tree rings, and even ancient urine, which we mentioned earlier and we will still come to later on in this presentation. Evidence can be found in these layers that can be used to reconstruct the environmental conditions at the time that those layers were formed. So in our case, we use lake sediment. Examination of the layers formed by the lake sediment can reveal the environmental conditions at the time that that sediment was deposited on the lake bottom. Some of the forms of this evidence can be pollen. So plants surrounding the lake release a lot of pollen. This pollen lands on the lake surface and slowly sinks down to the lake bottom. When you examine at a certain depth of sediment on the lake, you can identify the species that the pollen came from. So this will tell you what plant species existed around the lake at the time that that sediment was deposited. Now, based on knowledge of what different species tolerate in terms of conditions, you can infer what environmental conditions were present at the time that that pollen was deposited. Similarly, you can use diatoms. For those of you who don't know, diatoms are algae that's encased in a glass shell. And when they die, this glass shell breaks in half, and the two halves of the glass shell and the algae sink to the bottom. The algae quickly decomposes, but this glass shell can remain for thousands of years. So, just like the pollen, you examine for different species of diatoms that were deposited at that time. Now, certain diatoms are adapted for shallow water, and certain diatoms are adapted for deep water. So say you, at a certain depth, you find a high ratio of shallow water diatoms to deep water diatoms. You can say at the time that those diatoms were deposited in the sediment, the lake was relatively shallow. Likewise, there are saline species of diatoms and freshwater species of diatoms, which can tell you if at that time was it part of the ocean or was it a fresh lake. Other evidence can be found in percent organic content of the sediments, and I will be talking about that later on in the presentation. So we can attach dates to the sediments that we find. Most commonly, we use carbon-14 dating. So from different depths along your core, you remove bits of plant material such as seeds or just leaves, even just decomposed organic matter, and you get that carbon dated. And then that pretty much turns your core into a timeline. You got dates for the different depths of the core, and you got evidence along this depth. So from that, you can make a graph like this with years before the present, and then your results. So you can identify at what times these conditions were present. If this interests any of you, I would highly suggest that you check out and see if Curt's Paleoecology course is offered next fall. I took it a couple years ago, and it's one of the greatest courses I've ever taken here. It's really good if you enjoy this type of history. You get to go out and take your own lake cores and examine them yourself and discover insights on the history of these lakes. It's pretty exciting.
So two lakes were at the center of the project's research, Verlorenvlei, which the Vlei at the end of that means lake in Afrikaans. It's a derivative of a Dutch language. So Verlorenvlei in the winter rainfall region where we went this summer, and Lake Sabea in the summer rainfall region, as you can see from the pictures. And Sabea was already explored in previous trips. So now we're going to talk about our trip to Africa. Basically, at the end of the semester, we flew down and spent 2 weeks in late May in Africa. We flew into Cape Town and stayed at the University of Cape Town's All Africa House. This is kind of like a guest dorm at the university for guest professors, lecturers, researching grad students. Then we traveled north to Elands Bay, that's where Verlorenvlei is located, and west into the Drakensberg Mountains and south to Cape Agulhas. So we were pretty much all along the coast of the southern tip of Africa. Saw a lot of beautiful scenery, encountered a lot of cultures, exotic wildlife and plants, and worked with a lot of scientists.
So these are a few pictures of Cape Town. Top two pictures are from the campus of the University of Cape Town. It's has some very nice architecture, as you can see in the top left picture. It's a very large campus. There's only a small part of it that you see here. It's a very prestigious school. It's really the Harvard and Yale of the entire African continent. A lot of grad students doing a lot of different types of projects and a lot of stuff going on. Behind those buildings, you can see Table Mountain. Table Mountain is this just enormous plateau that just juts up hundreds of feet up above the city. And basically, Cape Town is built between Table Mountain and the ocean and kind of around Table Mountain. So anywhere that you are on a clear day in Cape Town, Table Mountain is just looming up above you. And on our last day in Cape Town, we took a cable car up to the top of the mountain and got these great views of all of Cape Town beneath us. In this bottom right picture, if you look out in the bay, you can see this island here. That's Robben Island, which was the prison of Nelson Mandela for 20 years.
As I mentioned, we saw a lot of exotic wildlife today. Here's just a very small collage of some of the biodiversity that you'll see in Africa in the wildlife. Baboons, lots of birds. We saw a lot of water birds because we were on lakes and along the coast. The Springbok, which is down here, the lower right-hand corner, is kind of the mascot of the ungulates for South Africa. And interestingly enough, Africa even has its own species of penguin. The African penguin used to be known as the jackass penguin because when it calls, it does sound exactly like a donkey.
Now, the Western Cape has its entirely own floral kingdom. I think there's about 6 to 8 different floral kingdoms on the planet. There's Old World Tropics, New World Tropics, Northern Arboreal. I think Australia has its own floral kingdom. But then this is the smallest floral kingdom in the world, only in this tiny little area in the Western Cape. It's the greatest amount of terrestrial plant diversity in the entire world. And just to give you an idea, it only covers 90,000 square kilometers, but contains about 8,500 different plant species. Many of these species are endemic to the Western Cape, meaning they only exist in this tiny little area right here.
So now on Lake Verlorenvlei. As you can see, this lake is a very long and narrow lake. You can easily see from shore to shore. It's also a very shallow lake. It's only about a meter at its deepest. And in the surrounding areas, there's caves on the side that you're seeing the view from. This picture's actually taken from a cave above the lake. And it's a residential area, a house all along the lake shore, as well as agricultural area, as you can see from the fields in the background.
And should be noted that on the right is the inlet end. There's a river of the same name that flows into it. And to the left, much further down, it flows out into the ocean.
So while we're at the lake, we got very lucky with the weather. We got very lucky in general with the weather at our trip. Remember, the Western Cape is the winter rainfall region, and their seasons are opposite ours. So when it's summer for us, it's winter there. We should have been encountering heavy westerly rainstorms like the top picture shows. But instead, we got beautiful, clear weather for most of it with showers every now and then.
Okay, so On previous trip, there had been cores taken from towards the outlet end of the lake. Now, on this trip, we wanted cores from more towards the inlet end. We wanted to get some effects of the inflowing river. But at the same time, we didn't want it so close to the river that the sediments would have been disturbed. And we didn't want it close to the shores where shoreline erosion might have disturbed the sediments. So we wanted a spot out towards the middle of the lake, towards the inland end. In some of these pictures are some of the scientists who are working with us. University of Cape Town scientists Brian Chase here and Michael Meadows, which is not great pictures of it up there. Also helping us out was University of Cape Town graduate student Linwood.
So once you find your location, you kind of set anchor and you get ready to take your cores. We had two types of cores we were going to take. A longer core, which was just aluminum pipe, and a short core to get the top surface sediments for analysis. The longer core is just basically to get as much as you can without sacrificing any of the top layer as well. But if you do kind of get a little bit of mixing in the top layers, you got that shorter core to really complete those murky layers. When you take a core, you want to keep it as vertical as possible, because if you go sideways, you're getting a cross-section of the sedimentation of the layers, and that's no good. So when you stick a core into the ground, and it was pretty easy, we didn't need any special equipment because the lake was only about a meter deep. You have all that water sitting on top of the sediment. So as you're pulling the core back up, kind of like a straw with water in it, you have your finger over it. If you release that pressure, it's going to flush all out of the bottom. Same thing with the core. If you pull it out of the lake without plugging the bottom quickly, you're going to just have all the water pressure force the sediment out of the core. So that's a timing game, and it's one of the harder parts to do.
Yeah, we had that happen to us a couple times on our second core, just too much pressure forcing all the sediment down. But we did get a couple of very nice cores from that lake, as well as cores from other lakes.
And so once you get it capped on the bottom, you got to keep it vertical the entire rest of the trip, because you don't want any mixing of the layers. And then, in addition to cores, we took some surface water samples to use for diatom counts and just water quality. When you take it out of the lake, you still have to keep it vertical. And so, with the shorter core, it's not too difficult. It's a one-person job, but with that long core, you need to make sure it's stable through the whole time. Once you get it where the rest of your equipment is, you kind of determine where the water sits on top of the sediment, and you cut the core there, get rid of that water, cap both ends, and now you got a secured core. Take it back to, we used a lot of hotel bathrooms and the University of Cape Town bathrooms to extract the cores. Those top surface layers are really murky, so if you just lay them any which way, they'll mix up and then you ruin your data. So centimeter by centimeter, we scoop off those top layers of mud and put them in individual bags, and they're secure for the trip home.
So while we were on the lake, we noticed this cave. We'll go back a few pictures. In this top left-hand picture, you can see on the horizon this jutting of land sticking up. It was this cave, and we were told by the scientists we were working with and by locals who lived on the lake that there was an archaeological project that had been going on there for about 20 years now. And we were told that it had cave paintings that dated back 70,000 years. And it was previously thought that the earliest form of human painting was about 30,000 years ago. So these predated about 40,000 years. So we really definitely had to check this out. On our last day, the day we were driving back to Cape Town from Verlorenvlei, we stopped by, and this wasn't a tourist site. We had to drive onto this Afrikaner's farm. Curt talked to the farmer, who was very nice, and led us up to this dirt road to the base of the hill. And we walked up from there. And there were no archaeologists there that day, but you can see here their digging operation. They dig trenches, and just like we use layers to date evidence, so do they. When they find artifacts deeper down in the soil, that means it's older than the stuff further up. These top two pictures are some of the cave paintings that were there. I don't know if you see this guy in the top left-hand picture with the enormous ears and what looks like an enormous penis. I don't know if that was supposed to be a god or if they just thought very highly of themselves. I can't promise that these paintings are 70,000 years old, but some of them very well might be. It should also be noted that it's believed that at the time that this cave was inhabited, Verlorenvlei wasn't a lake at all, but a bay of the ocean, because the ocean level was much higher at that time. So they probably lived off the rich tidal flats that would have gone up right to the base of the hill at that time.
So now we've mentioned higher XP a couple of times in the presentation, and this is the part where we get to it. So a higher X is this long animal in the top left picture, also known as a dassy in South Africa or a rock rabbit. And these guys look like fairly large rodents, like a woodchuck, and in fact they're more related to elephants than rodents. They're pretty much prey species for both aerial and land predators, so they have kind of a selective need for shelter, being above the ground, but also protected from the sky. So you have these elevated, overhanging small cliffs that they like to use. And so over a lot of generations, they use the same place over and over again, and their excrement accumulates over time for thousands of years. And just like anything that builds up over thousands of years, it forms layers. And that tar-like substance you see in the top right, that's a ton of dassy urine over thousands of years. In that layers are nitrogen isotopes from the plants they eat, and depending on the ratios of what isotopes are there, scientists can use that to infer the climate by what type of plant species were dominant at the time. Now, it's not a new science, but Brian Chase is really the guy pioneering the use of it.
Yeah, he's the first, he did develop himself, but he's the first person to really use it. And as he helped us out with our project, we helped him out with his. So we drove into the Drakensberg Mountains, which is about a full day's drive inland from Cape Town. Really nice drive. We go up windy roads, up enormous plateaus, and then into valleys of citrus orchards and along dirt roads into the desert mountains. And we got to our location where the cave that we were interested in was about a mile walk in or in from the road. And along the way we saw more caves and more cave paintings, wildlife including dassies themselves. And we got to this cave, which is elevated up off the ground and underneath this overhang. And Brian got in his jumpsuit and his gloves, gas mask and a turban, and had his electric drill, which he drilled into this enormous chunk of thousands of years of dried urine. And he's wearing all this stuff because it throws this dry piss dust everywhere, and you don't want to breathe that in or get it on your skin. So after drilling hundreds of holes in it, working on it a while with a chisel and a crowbar, and finally pried off this 150-pound trunk of piss that we carried out the mile on a stretcher. And although 150 pounds might not sound like a lot, carrying it out over rocky desert terrain wasn't easy. It was quite an ordeal, but it was a lot of fun. And then this is a picture showing the layers that form in these dassy middens. And so I think this is from Brian's lab at the University of Cape Town, which totally just reeks of urine, makes the whole geology department reek of urine, which I'm sure everybody appreciates there. And he's got just dozens of these things. And so he uses a Dremel to take out small samples from each layer. He gets them dated, and like Christiaan was saying, analyzes them for nitrogen isotopes, which he can make inferences about what their diet was, how much vegetation they were eating, what kind of vegetation, which he can take to interpret what the climate was like in terms of rainfall at the time.
So it wasn't all just work. When we did finish our coring, we had some time to check out the places, which was really amazing. We went to Cape Agulhas, which is the southern tip of Africa. As you can see from the top couple pictures there, and that's where the Indian and Atlantic Ocean meet. And about halfway from the equator to Antarctica, so just over the horizon is Antarctica. We also went to the Cape of Good Hope, which is the most southwestern point of Africa. Saw a lot of cool stuff. More animals, more wildlife, tidal pools, just beautiful scenery.
Yeah, the oceans in this area are very, very, very productive. Just all the water flowing in the waves just green with algae, and the beaches are just covered in dead ocean life. Also, not to mention that the oceans around here have the highest population of great white sharks too. So currently, I'm working on some of the cores that we took from this year and from cores of previous years from Verlorenvlei, and I'm analyzing percent organic content. This is the core here, and so what am I looking for in percent organic content? Well, the idea is that the inflowing river brings in mineral deposits, mineral sediments. So say if I find at a certain depth that there's a very low ratio of organic matter to mineral matter, I can take that to mean that the river at that time was bringing in a lot of sediments. And if the river's bringing in a lot of sediments, it must be because it's flowing stronger. So it's a generalization, but you could say low organic matter to mineral matter is the wet climate. And so I work centimeter at a time, going back down through it. If you look at this core, you can kind of see these bands of mineral deposits, the gray there. And then the next slide, this is a picture of Verlorenvlei during the rainy season. And I don't know if you can see it at all really, but there's this light brown that's just from here on up to the river. And that's just the mineral sediments being deposited by the river, and it just shows that during rainy times it does make this influx of mineral material into the lake sediment. And I've completed 2 cores so far. Next slide. And then I can graph them out. This is the depth in centimeters of the core. This is a single core here. This is percent organic content. And then here we have carbon dates taken from different depths. And so about here is 600 years ago, about 400 years ago. And at 400 years, there's a pretty obvious decline in organic content. Now, we're not certain what this means yet, but the thought is that about 400 years ago is when the Dutch settled South Africa and brought in agriculture, so they would have been creating a lot of erosion, which would have added a lot of sediments to the stream. So for that instance, we're not assuming that to mean wetter climates necessarily. But you can't really just draw conclusions based on a single core and a single piece of evidence analyzed. Taking many cores from Verlorenvlei as well as from other lakes, and we're analyzing them not for percent organic, but also Curt's working on diatom composition, and we have a colleague in Germany working on pollen composition. So you get lots of cores from different lakes, looking at different things and comparing them all together, you can be more certain about your conclusions. So why are we studying past climate changes? What does it mean? Why is this important? Well, if this compression model is in fact correct, and we find it to be correct, and global climates do continue to become warmer, then these it's going to mean a reduction in Antarctic sea ice, which is going to result in weakening of these westerly winds, meaning that a lot less rain is going to be hitting the Western Cape here. So that would result in a huge loss of fresh water for the Western Cape of South Africa.
And this is going to be very detrimental as water is already kind of scarce for that region, not only to farmers and their vineyard businesses, but to all residents, especially those living in informal settlements. And that's the title we get into the places of extreme poverty, where there are already people coming, typically from North Africa,
Zimbabwe especially, because they're poor conditions.
and they're trying to find work, and they try to find work before they even find housing. So the government builds these settlements, which they can't keep up with as the number of people increase coming to it. And they share their same water supply for bathing, drinking, and using the bathroom. If there's no more rain coming to the area, they got no more water. There's way too many people living in it, and it just creates the same conditions they already tried to escape from. Not only do you have those socio-economical problems associated with the loss of the rain to the region, but also huge threats to biodiversity. Remember the Springbok, that Cape Floral system that only exists there? Well, that'll be gone because they depend exclusively on the rain coming from those western rainstorms.
And as they're endemic to this region, if they die because they lose rain here, then that's the extinction of thousands of species of plants because they don't exist anywhere else.
While we were on Verlorenvlei, a couple of the residents that live on the lake brought up a threat that could potentially mean destruction for the lake. And the company wants to put a tungsten mine up from the lake, and they want to use the water from the river in their mining process. This will alter the flow and level of incoming water to the lake, which is already shallow to begin with, causing the drying of that lake. It's a very important area for a lot of birds, one of the top 10 most important areas for wading birds. And it's also home to a huge wetland system along the river. By altering the flow of the lake, that's all going to be gone. And as well as, I'm going to assume there's any pollution from the mining process that contaminates the lake, which the people use for their drinking water that live on the lake. If you want to learn more, that's the website to the Verlorenvlei Coalition, and keeping an update on what's happening with the tungsten mine and more information in general about the lake and the region.
Yeah, it's local residents who live on the lake, farmers, and all residents. And, just they wanted us to, try to bring this issue back home because, they're up against a big challenge with this tungsten mine. So it really was a hell of an experience. We can only begin to touch upon all that we learned. Not just science stuff, but learning stuff about other cultures and about how people live on, throughout the rest of the world. And not to mention, it was just a really great time. We all really enjoyed ourselves, and it's a wonderful experience.
So we'd like to acknowledge Dr. Curt for giving us the opportunity to even come with him and partake in this research. Carrie Johnson, who took her vacation to come help us and also take a lot of amazing, wonderful pictures. We definitely want to thank the University of Cape Town and the scientists we worked with, because without them we wouldn't have had a base of operations or anyone to collaborate with. National Science Foundation for giving us the go-ahead on this project. Without them, there would be no reason to go. And Paleoecology College, of course, because it's always been good to the students for giving us opportunities to do things like this.
Are there any questions?
I noticed your name's with two A's. Are you of African descent?
I have Dutch in me, but I don't know if it's from Africa.
Very good.
Yeah, it's not a typo.
Why did you choose the two lakes? Because it kind of seems like you got two different extremes. Was that just to see maybe an average between the two? Because you have the one that's like a meter deep, and Lake Victoria is a pretty large lake, I believe, right?
So Victoria was previous research, and that was seeing weather patterns in the tropics.
Okay.
Now, when those inconsistencies came up, we kind of wanted to determine what was going on with that. So by getting Verlorenvlei, it's in the winter rainfall region, and that's a different system of rainfall. It gets it from those westerly winds, so we want to see what's happening during the same time after you core after you date the cores from Victoria. You can see what happens at the same time with the core and the Verlorenvlei by dating that and seeing, does this have wetter conditions at the same time it had dry conditions, or what was going on?
And we have cores taken from Sabaya, which is the summer rainfall region. So you can see maybe where the ITCZ is, if it's really wet up at Victoria and Vasha, and it's dry in the summer rainfall region, the ITCZ might not be moving down that much. So it's, you want to get records from different locations to see the movement of these weather patterns. Yeah.
Where did you take the core samples from in the lake? Were there specific areas that you?
Well, on Verlorenvlei, there were already cores taken from the elongated lake, and there were already cores taken from the outlet end. And so we were taking cores up more towards the inlet. It's good to have your cores spread out, you know, because if there's something that's going to cause an error in one, you might be able to see it by looking at a different spot in the lake. So, yeah, we were up on the inlet end of the lake, out towards the middle. Like I said, we wanted a spot where sediments had just slowly deposited over time, where there hadn't been any disturbance of the sediment.
I'm going to say if people have more questions too, some of us will be at lunch at 11:30, and just want to thank these guys for an amazing presentation. They did an incredible job. And if you get interested in this topic at all, I'll just remind you we're offering a paleoecology class next semester. And we do these kinds of things actually here out on the lake and in the region. We have projects that have to do with water quality, climate change, and environmental change. So it's I think Jay had a good time. He did a great job. Hope you want to do it too. Thanks a lot. And,